Rain hammered the rusted hood of the sheriff's truck as thunder cracked open the sky. The beam of a flashlight trembled in a gloved hand, its pale circle sweeping across overgrown brush and fallen fence posts until it stopped, locked on the edge of the well. The dog wouldn't move. Muscles taut, breath low and steady, the shepherd mix crouched like a statue of stone in silence. Water dripped from her matted coat. Her amber eyes didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stared like something below had spoken to her. "Ghost," Lana whispered, breath catching in her throat. "What is it, girl?" She knew, deep down, the same way she knew the storm wasn't the only thing rolling in. The dog didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the voice that had pulled her from death 2 years ago. She simply growled, low and distant, like an echo from a grave. Lana's boots sank into the mud as she stepped forward, heart drumming hard against her ribs. She'd seen ghosts like this once before. On the Henderson case, 3 counties south. The girl in the freezer. That stare. That silence. Ghost only did this when she knew. The wind roared through the pine trees like it was trying to say something no one had listened to for a very long time. Lana dropped to one knee beside the well, gripping the edge with fingers that trembled more from memory than cold. Her light dipped into the blackness, searching. Raindrops scattered across the beam like broken glass. Then she saw it. Not clearly, just the hint of something unnatural. A corner, a fabric edge, not rock, not root. She pulled back, breath shuddering. "Dispatch, this is Officer Lana Marquez. I need a recovery team at 1139 Old Mill Road. Probable human remains? Repeat, probable human remains." Ghost whimpered, a soft, haunting sound that didn't match her usual steel. And just like that, the silence returned. 2 hours earlier, she'd been at her desk, scratching at paperwork that never ended, when the call came in. Trespassing, barking dog, some old coot with a shotgun threatened to shoot. Typical backwoods nonsense. The kind of call they toss to rookies or, in her case, the burnout officer with a troubled K9 and a pension 3 years out of reach. She almost didn't go, but something about the address caught her eye. Old Mill Road. She hadn't heard that name since the summer she graduated from the academy. The same summer a girl named Evelyn Carter vanished without a trace, and the whole town forgot her name by fall. Except Lana hadn't, and maybe Ghost hadn't either. She didn't mean to keep Evelyn's file in her bottom drawer. It wasn't standard procedure, and she wasn't even assigned to that case. But it haunted her. 17 years old. Last seen riding her bike near the outskirts of town. Her mother gone to pieces. Her father, drunk and violent, screaming at reporters. No body, no suspects, no closure. Just a fading photo on a rusted community board and the quiet judgment of a town that hated open wounds. Lana had found the file in an evidence box during a purge last winter. Half the pages were smeared with mildew and time, but the last interview still burned in her mind. She said she heard something calling from the well. She was scared, thought it was a trick, but she said it sounded like a child. She never forgot that. And now as the recovery team lowered their equipment into the earth and the floodlights lit up the clearing like a midnight stage, Lana stood still beside Ghost, soaking wet, her hand on the dog's back like it was the only thing tethering her to the moment. "They're pulling something up," said one of the techs, voice clipped, eyes wide. The winch creaked, a rope ascended, and then a tattered backpack broke the surface, molded, ripped at the seams, purple, with a faded patch in the shape of a sunflower. Lana's knees nearly gave. She'd seen that backpack before. In the photo, in the file, Evelyn Carter's. The night wore on and the crowd swelled. News vans, uniforms, flashing lights painting the trees like a twisted holiday. But Lana couldn't hear any of it. Her ears rang with the sound of rain, soft now, a whisper compared to the scream in her chest. Ghost sat by her side, gaze fixed on the well, unmoving. When they pulled the body up, there wasn't much left. Bones, scraps of clothing, a necklace, tarnished but intact, dog tags, not military, custom, small, child-sized. They read, Evie. Later, in the silence of her cruiser, Lana stared at the dog tags resting in her palm. Ghost lay curled on the back seat, finally calm. The storm had passed, both outside and in, but Lana felt the first crack form in a wall she'd held up too long. She'd found her, after all these years. Or Ghost had. Maybe both of them were trying to dig out of something. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. The voice was hoarse, shaking. I saw the news, the backpack. I think I know who put her there. Lana froze. Who is this? The voice cracked like glass. My name is Jonah Carter. Evelyn was my sister. I was 10 when she disappeared, and I think my father lied to everyone. A memory hit her like lightning. The father. Drunk, angry, red-eyed and red-faced. I think he killed her, Jonah whispered, and I think I helped him cover it up. The line went dead. The voice still echoed in her mind long after the line went dead. I think I helped him cover it up. Lana sat in the dark, the rain now a mere whisper on the roof. Ghost's rhythmic breathing barely audible over her own rising pulse. She stared at the phone like it might ring again, like it owed her another truth. But silence clung to the cabin of her cruiser like fog. She replayed Jonah's voice over and over, each pause, each tremor, trying to decide if it was grief or guilt that had driven him to speak after all these years. Either way, it cracked something open, something the town had sealed shut like concrete. Lana turned the keys. The engine sputtered to life. Ghost stirred in the back seat and rested her chin on the seat's edge, eyes tracking her in the mirror. We're not going home yet, girl. The Carter house hadn't changed. A sagging porch, crooked wind chimes swaying without breeze, and shutters hanging like broken limbs. The front yard, once wild with garden beds Evelyn used to tend, was now nothing but frost-bitten weeds and beer cans crunched into the mud. She parked a little ways off and killed the lights. The house sat in a pocket of shadows, moonlight barely touching it. She could feel Ghost stiffen behind her, ears up, posture shifting. I know, Lana murmured. Me too. She stepped out into the cold, every sense on alert. The front door opened before she reached it. A figure stepped onto the porch. Slender, hesitant, backlit by a flickering hallway light. Jonah? She called softly. He nodded, shoulders hunched beneath an oversized flannel. A man not yet 30, but already weathered like the wood beneath his feet. His eyes looked too old for his face. I didn't think you'd come so fast. Your sister's been waiting long enough. He blinked hard, swallowing. I need to show you something. Something I buried. Lana's hand hovered near her belt, but she didn't move for her weapon. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't a threat, just a man trying to scrape the truth out of his bones. Lead the way. He didn't take her inside. Instead, he turned and walked behind the house, Ghost slipping silently beside them. The path was overgrown, choked with vines and dead grass, but Jonah didn't seem to care. They reached a small clearing near the woodshed. He dropped to his knees. I came out here the night she disappeared, he said, voice low. I was just a kid, but I remember my dad. His hands were bleeding. There was dirt on the hem of his shirt, and he kept muttering about the well, about burying the sin before it swallowed the town. He dug with his hands, clumps of dirt caking under his nails. Lana knelt to help. The cold bit into her skin, but she didn't stop, not until her fingers hit something solid. A small tin box. Jonah pulled it free and pried it open with shaking hands. Inside was a bundle of letters, faded with age and dampness. One photo, one bracelet, and a small, jagged knife. The photo was of Evelyn, standing with Jonah and a man who could only be their father. Her smile wide, his hand tight on her shoulder. Too tight. Lana picked up one of the letters and carefully unfolded it. It was childlike, scrawled in uneven handwriting. Dear Jonah, if anything happens to me, please remember what I told you. He's not who you think he is. I heard what he did. I think he hurt the girl from the camp. I think he's going to hurt me too. Ghost whined, a low, drawn-out sound, as if she too understood the weight of the words. I thought she was just scared, Jonah whispered. We had this camp she went to in the summers, Camp Lilac. She started coming back quieter each year. One day she told me she saw something terrible in the old maintenance shed. Said there were girls who screamed and no one listened. Lana's stomach twisted. After she vanished, Dad said she ran off, that she was always soft like her mother. But I found this box 3 days later. I was scared. I buried it, told myself it wasn't real. And now, Lana asked, voice hoarse, I can't lie anymore. A burst of wind rattled the trees above them. The fire in Lana's chest was no longer grief. It was fury, controlled, cold. She looked at the bracelet in the box, beaded with tiny white flowers. Evelyn had worn it in the missing person photo. Jonah, you need to come with me. This might reopen the case, not just for your sister, maybe for other girls too. He nodded, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. But Ghost suddenly stepped between them, rigid, growling. Her ears were back, her eyes locked on the tree line behind them. Lana froze. Then came the sound, slow, deliberate footsteps in the underbrush. She drew her weapon. Jonah, behind me, now! Footsteps stopped. Then a voice, low, rough. I thought I told you to leave this alone, boy. A silhouette emerged, backlit by the faint glow of a cigarette. His frame was thicker now, older, but Lana recognized the shape of his stance, the tension in his shoulders, the way his right leg dragged just slightly. Alan Carter, she breathed. He looked her over, smirked. Didn't know the badge sent girls to dig up ghosts. Lana kept her aim steady. Your daughter wasn't a ghost. She was a victim, and we found her. His smile faltered for the first time. I don't know what that mutt sniffed out, he muttered, tossing the cigarette to the ground. But you're barking up the wrong damn tree. Ghost lunged a half step forward, teeth bared. She never ran away, did she? Lana asked, voice ice. She tried to tell someone what you did, what you covered up, maybe what Camp Lilac was hiding. His face twitched. Jonah's voice cracked behind her. Tell her the truth, Dad. Tell her what you made me do. But the old man didn't speak, just turned slowly and limped into the shadows. Stay with him, Lana told Ghost, then took off. Branches clawed at her arms as she chased after Alan, flashlight beam bouncing wildly through the trees. She could hear him panting, crashing through the underbrush, desperate and cornered. He reached the road, and just as he stepped onto the wet asphalt, headlights swept around the bend. A cruiser. He froze like a deer. Lana closed in, gun raised. On your knees! Hands where I can see them! For a moment he looked like he might run again, but then he dropped, the fight finally gone. Back at the station, as they processed Alan Carter and bagged the contents of the tin box as evidence, Lana sat with Jonah in the hallway. Neither spoke. Ghost lay between them, eyes finally closed, her breathing soft and steady. Thank you, Jonah said, voice barely audible. Lana looked down at the photo in her hand, Evelyn smiling, unaware of the shadows looming behind her. She deserved better, she whispered. Jonah nodded. They all did. A pause, then Lana asked, You said there were girls at the camp? He looked at her, and the fear in his eyes returned. Evelyn wasn't the only one who saw something, and Camp Lilac, it's still open. Lana's heart pounded. I think, Jonah whispered, that place is still hurting people. The folder sat heavy in her hands, damp at the edges from where the rain had soaked through her jacket. Lana stared at the Camp Lilac logo stamped on the top corner, a simple lilac bloom in soft purple ink, clean, innocent, almost cruel in its gentleness. She traced the curve of the flower with her thumb as Ghost lay quietly by her feet, head resting on her paws, eyes never straying far from the door. Jonah hadn't slept, neither had she. He sat across from her now in the station's interview room, same flannel from last night, crumpled and too big, eyes raw and sunken. His voice was steadier, but only barely. I don't remember all of it. I was 10, but I remember there was a girl, quiet, always had a notebook with her. Evelyn said she saw her go into the maintenance shed after lights out one night. She never came back. Lana leaned forward. What was her name? Jonah blinked. I don't know. I think she had a scar on her temple. Small. Here. He pointed just above his right eyebrow. But after that night, the counselors told everyone she went home early. Sick, they said. Like that girl just vanished and no one cared. Ghost shifted, ears twitching. Do you think Evelyn saw what happened to her? I think Evelyn tried to tell someone, but when she came back from camp, she was different. Started writing in a journal, always locking her door. She stopped riding her bike out past the mills. Lana reached into her coat and pulled out one of the letters from the tin box. She wrote this, she said, placing it on the table between them. Not just to you. She meant for someone to find it. She was leaving a trail. Jonah didn't touch it, just stared at the faded paper like it might burst into flame. She said she heard screams. Yeah, he murmured. And I think I did too. The drive out to Camp Lilac was longer than she remembered. Almost 3 hours of winding mountain roads, sun breaking weakly through pale clouds, mist clinging to the tops of trees like ghosts trying to hold on. Ghost rode in the passenger seat this time, one paw draped off the seat like she owned it. But her posture was tense, head up, eyes tracking every curve of the road. As they crested the final hill, Lana caught sight of the wooden sign nailed between two leaning birches. Camp Lilac, established 1968, where young hearts grow. The last word was cracked, a splinter running through the W. The gate was open. The buildings ahead were aged but tidy, fresh coats of paint over old wounds. Bright blue cabins, a cheerful bell tower, banners still fluttering from last summer's Creative Arts Week. But Lana saw it for what it was. A fresh coat of paint doesn't hide rot, it masks it. She pulled in slowly. There was no one visible, but music drifted faintly from somewhere. Soft guitar, maybe from a radio. Ghost sat up straighter, her body now alert. They stepped out together. The gravel crunched beneath her boots, and the sharp scent of pine mingled with something faintly chemical. Lana knocked on the office door. No answer. She tried the handle. It opened easily. The room inside was warm, even cozy. A fireplace flickered to one side. Old camp photos lined the walls. Groups of smiling kids, arms slung around each other. Staff members grinning from behind clipboards and lanyards. A woman stood near the desk, startled by the door swinging open. "Oh, sorry, we're not open for visitors just yet," she said, brushing silver hair behind her ear. "You must have seen the old sign. We're prepping for spring session." Lana held up her badge. The smile fell from the woman's face. "Officer Lana Marquez," she said. "I'm reopening an investigation tied to this camp. I need to ask you some questions." The woman blinked, then composed herself quickly. "I'm the director, Margaret Reed." "What kind of investigation?" Lana glanced down at Ghost, who had walked past them, and was now sniffing near the back of the room. Close to a door marked "Storage, Staff Only." Margaret's eyes followed the dog uneasily. Lana stepped closer. "Do you remember a girl named Evelyn Carter? She attended your summer sessions about 10 years ago?" Margaret nodded slowly. "Yes, I remember the name. She was here, but she wasn't the easiest child, prone to stories, rumors. Did she report anything to you?" "I don't believe so. Not to me, personally. But she was scared. She wrote letters, said she heard other girls screaming." Margaret crossed her arms, her expression hardening just slightly. "This camp has operated for over 50 years. We've had our share of troubled children, ones who struggled to separate fantasy from reality. I'd caution against resurrecting baseless accusations, especially without evidence." Ghost let out a low growl from the other side of the room. She was now pawing at the door. Lana turned sharply. "What's in there?" "Just supplies, cleaning equipment. It's not relevant. I'd like to take a look." "That's not..." "Ma'am." Margaret hesitated. Then slowly, she unlocked the door. The air that greeted them was colder, sterile. A fluorescent light flickered overhead. Shelves of bleach bottles, mops, paper towels lined the walls. But in the corner was something off. A tall metal cabinet with no label, padlocked. Ghost sat beside it, silent now, just staring. "Open it," Lana said. Margaret's voice dropped. "That's private staff storage." Lana stepped forward, voice steel. Then you'll have no issue opening it. When the padlock clicked and the door swung open, Lana felt her stomach twist. Inside were old file folders. Dozens of them. Names, photos, notes. Some pages had timestamps, video logs. Others were redacted. But one stood out. A folder marked Summer 2012. Incident report, subject EC. She opened it. Inside was a psychological report. Dated, stamped. Signed by a staff member whose name was scribbled out. The summary read, subject continues to fabricate abuse claims. Unresponsive to conditioning. May require transfer to off-site facility if disruptive behavior escalates. There was a photo attached. Evelyn, her face pale, eyes red, like she'd been crying for hours. Lana felt her hands curl into fists. "What the hell were you running here?" she demanded, turning on Margaret, whose calm demeanor had cracked completely. The woman shook her head. "It wasn't what you think. We were trying to help these children. The ones no one else wanted, but they were too damaged." Ghost growled again. "They weren't damaged," Lana hissed. "You broke them." Margaret's face hardened. "You don't understand what it's like. The parents who dumped them here. The funding we needed to survive. We did what we had to." Lana backed away, folder in hand. "You're under arrest." Outside, the wind picked up again, and Ghost led the way out, her pace quickening, not toward the cruiser, but toward the edge of the property, to the shed behind the cabins. Lana followed. The lock on the shed was new, shiny, untouched by age. Ghost stared at it. Lana looked around. No one else in sight. The silence suddenly felt too heavy. She pried the door open with her knife. What lay beyond the threshold stopped her breath. Rows of bunk beds, a recording device, a wall of soundproof padding, chains on one bedpost, and a child's shoe in the corner. Untouched, dusty, but unmistakably new. This place hadn't been abandoned. It had been restarted. And maybe, just maybe, it hadn't stopped at all. The air inside the shed was thick, heavier than it should have been, as if the walls had held their breath for years and finally exhaled. The dust clung to her boots with each step, muffling her movements. Ghost entered first, ears pricked forward, muscles taut like a pulled wire. The deeper they went, the more the rot crept in. Not the smell of decay, but the emotional kind, the kind that clung to skin and memory. Lana's flashlight swept across the room, illuminating crude bunk beds welded to the floor. Each had a thin mattress, barely more than a slab of foam. On the walls were hooks, empty now, but the placement of them sent a chill through her spine. And the camera in the far corner, it wasn't dusty, no spider webs, recently cleaned. Someone had been here, recently. She walked toward the child's shoe. It was pink, faded, with a little Velcro strap across the top. A small sticker peeled from the heel, something glittery, once cheerful. Now, it just looked lost. Lana crouched down, cradling it in her palm. A voice inside her whispered the same question on repeat. How many? How many walked into this room and never made it out whole? Ghost whined softly behind her, pacing. Lana stood slowly and turned to take a picture of everything. Every angle, every detail. Her hands steady even though her stomach threatened to revolt. She was trained for this. But this was a wound that had never been stitched. She stepped outside, gulping the cold mountain air like it might purify her lungs. Margaret Reed sat in the back of the cruiser now, her expression a quiet storm. No more soft-spoken smiles, just resignation. "You won't find a body," she called out through the cracked window. Lana didn't stop walking. "You're wasting your time. They never told me where they took the girl, just that she wouldn't be a problem anymore." Lana froze. She turned back, staring at the woman through the glass. "They?" Margaret smiled then, bitter and broken. "You really think it was just one camp?" Back at the precinct, the room had gone quiet around the evidence board. Pins, string, articles, and now Evelyn's photo dead center. Jonah sat in the corner, his arms wrapped around himself, a paper cup of coffee untouched in his hands. "She tried to warn us," he murmured. "All this time. She left the letters, the notes, Even the necklace in that well. Lana sat beside him, exhausted but charged, her mind a riot of questions. Ghost lay under the table, tail twitching in her sleep, her breathing deep and steady, until a soft knock at the door made her ears flick. Detective Rowan stepped in, his face grim. "Lana, you need to see this." He handed her a manila folder with the Department of Family Services seal. Camp Lilac was part of a state-funded rehabilitation initiative from 2007 to 2015, he said, meant to provide therapy for emotionally volatile youth. Problem was, oversight was handed off to a private contractor. He paused, then added, "Several of those contractors are still active, under different names." Lana opened the folder, a list of addresses, camp names, Camp Rosemary, Bright Path Ranch, Hope Creek, all scattered across the state. One name near the bottom made her hands shake slightly. Willow Ridge. She knew that one. It was still active, less than 40 miles from here. She looked up, fire returning to her voice. "We need warrants, every single location tied to that contractor. This wasn't negligence. This was a pipeline." Rowan hesitated. "That's going to step on a lot of toes, Lana. Political ones. Some of these names, they've donated to elections, sat on advisory boards." Lana snapped the folder shut. "I don't care if their names are stitched into the damn Constitution. If they had anything to do with this, we're going after them." That night she visited Evelyn's old house. It stood quiet and leaning on the edge of town, shutters crooked, lawn overgrown, mailbox rusted open. The place looked like it had given up waiting for someone to return. She stepped inside. The air was musty, filled with the scent of dust and old pine. The wallpaper had begun to peel near the corners, but the upstairs room, Evelyn's room, was still intact. Journals stacked by the window, drawings tacked to the wall. Some were just childlike doodles, others far more deliberate. A figure, always faceless, always standing just behind a child, sometimes holding her hand, sometimes holding her down. And near the windowsill, a small stuffed rabbit, ears threadbare, eyes scratched. Lana sat on the bed, hands folded in her lap. The floor creaked beneath her. She felt it, the echoes in this house, the quiet kind of grief that no longer cried out, just lingered. She opened the last journal Evelyn had written in. It wasn't filled with words, but single lines scattered across the pages. "They say I made it up. If I disappear, don't stop looking. Some monsters wear nice shoes and offer warm cocoa." The final page simply said, "She's still there, in the woods. I heard her." Ghost, who had climbed the stairs behind her, let out a low whimper and sat at Lana's feet, looking up at her like she understood. Lana closed the journal and looked out the window. The woods beyond swayed in the breeze, silent, watching. Somewhere out there, truth waited. And maybe Evelyn wasn't the only one who had vanished. They reached Willow Ridge by sunrise. Unlike Camp Lilac, this place was polished, corporate even. Wide entrance gates, brick buildings, a fresh blacktop parking lot. Smiling counselors wore matching uniforms. There was even a coffee bar for visiting parents. But beneath the shine, Lana saw the same cold calculation in the eyes of the director, Mr. Kessler. His handshake was warm, his smile perfect, his tone rehearsed. "You'll find nothing out of place here, Officer Marquez," he said as he led them through the dormitory halls. "We believe in transparency." Ghost didn't bark, didn't growl. She just walked the length of the corridor, then turned sharply down a side hallway. She stopped at a steel door marked, "Restricted Staff Use Only." Lana pushed past him. "No visitors allowed back there." "This isn't a visit." The moment she opened the door, the smell hit her. Bleach, ammonia, and beneath it, fear. Down a narrow hallway were several closed rooms, soundproofed. Ghost padded forward, nose to the ground, then stopped outside the last door. Lana pulled out her key card, bypassing the lock with a forensic override. Inside, a child sat on a cot, staring at the wall. Bare room, no windows, a camera in the ceiling. She couldn't have been older than 10. Her hair was matted. There were faint bruises on her wrists. Her feet were bare. Lana knelt down slowly. "What's your name?" The girl didn't answer. She just pointed to the corner of the room. There, drawn faintly in chalk, was a name, Evelyn, and beneath it, "I told you they never stopped." The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. Lana couldn't move at first, her body frozen by the sudden weight of everything crashing down on her. The girl's eyes were wide, unblinking, as if she were trapped in a nightmare, one that Lana knew too well. The chalk drawing, Evelyn's name, this wasn't a coincidence. Ghost, standing just outside the door, let out a low growl, her ears back. Lana's heart hammered in her chest as she reached out toward the girl. Her voice was soft, steady. "Hey, I'm not going to hurt you. What's your name?" The girl didn't speak, but her gaze shifted toward the wall, toward the drawing, and then she raised her hand slowly, trembling, and pointed at Lana. "Help," the girl whispered. Lana knelt, her hands gentle as she reached out to comfort her. But as she did, a shiver ran through her. Something was wrong here. The girl's eyes, those wide, terrified eyes, locked onto hers with an intensity that felt like a warning. And then the voice came. It wasn't from the girl. It wasn't even from the room. It was from the hallway, just outside the door. A man's voice, calm and unnervingly quiet. "I think that's far enough." Lana's blood turned to ice as she spun around to see Mr. Kessler standing in the doorway, his expression one of controlled menace. His hands were folded in front of him, the same perfect smile on his lips. But there was no warmth in it, just a cold, practiced stillness. "You're making a mistake, Officer Marquez," he said, his tone polite, as though she were just an inconvenient visitor. "This is a private facility. We don't tolerate this sort of interference." Lana's pulse quickened. "I'm not leaving until I get answers." Kessler's smile didn't waver. "You think you're helping her?" He gestured toward the girl, who was now shivering under Lana's touch. "You're only making things worse." Ghost's growl deepened, her body tensing like a coiled spring. Lana could feel the tension in the air, thickening with every second. Her instincts screamed at her to act, to not let him corner them in this room. "What have you done to her?" Lana demanded, stepping in front of the girl protectively. "Where's Evelyn?" Kessler's eyes darkened, his smile stretching just slightly at the corners. "You're a smart woman, officer, I can tell. But some things are better left buried." The girl shifted behind Lana, her hands shaking as she clutched the edge of Lana's jacket. Her voice, weak but desperate, came out in a barely audible whisper. "Evelyn, she never left." Lana's stomach twisted. She knew what that meant. Kessler didn't respond to the girl's words. Instead, he moved closer, his eyes narrowing. "You think you're going to stop this? You think you can save her? You're just a part of the system now. You're not the first one to come poking around, but you'll be the last." Lana felt her breath catch, a mix of fury and disbelief flooding her veins. He knows exactly what they've been doing." She turned quickly, her hand reaching out to the girl, steadying her. "Tell me where Evelyn is," Lana said again, her voice a low growl. But before the girl could answer, there was a loud bang from behind them, the unmistakable sound of a door being kicked open. In the next instant, Detective Rowan stormed into the room, gun drawn and aimed squarely at Kessler. Behind him, Jonah entered, his face pale but determined. "Move away from the girl," Rowan barked, his voice commanding. Kessler didn't flinch, but the shift in his posture was subtle, like a predator who knew the hunt was over. "You think you've won? You think this will stop anything? There are always more camps, always more children. You'll never—" Jonah cut him off, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You're not going anywhere. We have enough to bring you down." Lana stepped back, her eyes still on the girl, her heart pounding. She didn't want to take her eyes off Kessler, but the girl's eyes, filled with terror and relief, held her in place. "Evelyn was just the beginning," Lana said softly, the words tasting like fire in her mouth. "And I will make sure the truth comes out." Kessler's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The silence stretched out, thick with the weight of what was coming. It wasn't until they were outside, the cool night air biting at her skin, that Lana allowed herself a breath. The girl, her name, she finally learned, was Isabel, had been taken from her family years ago, placed into one of the many programs run by Kessler and his associates. She'd seen too much. She had been Evelyn's silent witness, the one who tried to warn them. Isabel was safe now, at least for the moment. But the weight of the truth was a heavy burden to carry. They weren't done yet. The truth was still buried in the tangled web of Camp Lilac, Willow Ridge, and the others. "Lana, you okay?" Rowan asked, his voice low beside her. She nodded but didn't answer at first. Instead, she looked down at the ground, her boots sinking slightly into the dirt. She thought of Evelyn, of the way the girl's eyes had haunted her, how they'd burned into her soul. "We still don't know how deep this goes," she said after a long pause, her voice steady but full of resolve. "But I'll follow it to the end. For them." Days passed before they could dig deeper into the files. The investigation expanded rapidly. As they pieced together the scattered fragments of truth, they found more names, more locations, more children who had slipped through the cracks of a broken system. Lana's mind was filled with the faces of all the children, now not just Evelyn and Isabel, but the ones still missing. The ones no one had ever bothered to report, whose names were erased before they could be spoken. She knew she couldn't save them all. Not alone. But with the weight of this truth in her hands, Lana was determined to bring every last one of them home. The case was no longer just about catching Kessler or taking down one camp. It was about tearing down a system built on silence, on fear, on the suffering of those too young to fight for themselves. And with every step she took, with every new revelation, Lana knew that she had already started a fire, one that wouldn't be easily put out. As the sun set that evening, the first light of justice began to flicker in the distance. The courthouse loomed in the distance, its towering steps seeming to stretch upward into an endless sky. Lana stood outside, her eyes focused on the doors, the weight of the past few days pressing down on her chest. Her mind was a swirl of emotions, grief, anger, and something deeper, something fierce and relentless. This wasn't over. Not yet. Behind her, Rowan and Jonah stood silent, each of them looking just as burdened by what they had uncovered. The evidence was undeniable now. Kessler's network, the camps, the children, all of it. It was too big to ignore, too powerful to be kept in the shadows any longer. Inside the courthouse, the air felt heavy, filled with the murmurs of 100 conversations, all vibrating with the knowledge that something monumental was about to unfold. As Lana walked through the doors, she could feel the eyes on her, some filled with hope, others laced with skepticism. It wasn't just her fight anymore. This was bigger than one woman or one case. This was about every child who had been forgotten, every soul lost in a system designed to crush them. Kessler's trial had begun. They had to be ready. Lana sat in the small conference room, papers strewn across the table, her mind working through each piece of evidence they had. Rowan sat across from her, his fingers drumming lightly on the wood, waiting for her to speak. The tension between them was palpable. It had been for days now, ever since the arrest. "You think we've got enough to take him down?" Rowan's voice was soft but edged with an undercurrent of uncertainty. Lana didn't hesitate. "We have to. This is bigger than just Kessler. This is about a system that's been hiding the truth for too long. He might be the face of it, but he's not the only one." She spread out the photographs of the camps, the names of the contractors, the trail of false documents they had uncovered. Each piece of the puzzle was starting to come together, but Lana knew better than to think they were done. Kessler might have been their biggest lead, but he wasn't the only thread to pull. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Jonah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "I talked to some of the families. They're scared, Lana. Kessler's people have deep connections. He's got enough money and influence to make this disappear if he's given the chance." Lana's eyes hardened. "Then we don't give him the chance." But even as she spoke, doubt crept in. She knew what they were up against. It wasn't just a fight for justice. It was a fight for the truth. A truth that had been buried beneath layers of corruption and silence for far too long. The courtroom was buzzing when they entered. Lana could hear the quiet hum of the audience, the shuffle of papers, the scratch of pens. The defense team had already set up their table, all sharp suits and perfect smiles, like they were waiting for a performance, not a trial. Kessler sat behind them, his face a mask of calm, but Lana could see the cracks in the facade. His eyes flicked over the room nervously. He knew what was coming. As the judge took his seat and the trial began, Lana could feel the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. She sat in the front row, her hands folded tightly in her lap, the evidence in her mind, ready to speak the truth. The prosecution went first, laying out their case piece by piece. Every document, every witness, every child who had been saved, all of it laid out like a map leading straight to Kessler's door. And then it was time. Time for Lana to stand. She rose slowly, her body tense, but her voice steady. The moment she stepped to the stand, everything felt like it quieted. The air, the people in the room, even the ticking of the clock on the wall. She could feel their eyes on her, all of them, but it was the girl's eyes she remembered. Isabel, Evelyn, all of them. She took a deep breath and began. She spoke of the children, those whose names had been forgotten, those whose voices had been stolen. She spoke of the camps, the abuse, the lies. She didn't spare the details. She didn't soften the truth. Because if she did, it would never be heard. Kessler shifted in his seat as Lana spoke, his jaw tightening with each word. His defense team began to murmur among themselves, trying to find a way to dismiss her words. But Lana could feel the truth gripping the room, tightening like a vice. She remembered Isabel's face, her wide, terrified eyes, her shaking hands. But it wasn't just Isabel. It was Evelyn. It was all of them. The ones still out there. The ones still trapped. As Lana spoke, she could hear Ghost's voice in her mind. This is for them. All of them. When she finished, the room fell into a heavy silence. Kessler's lawyer stood up, trying to counter her testimony, but it was clear that the weight of what Lana had said had struck a chord. They couldn't deny it anymore. The truth had a way of doing that. Days turned into weeks, but the trial progressed slowly. Each day brought more revelations, more evidence. Kessler's defenses began to crumble, piece by piece. Then just when it seemed like the end was near, a twist came. A new witness appeared, one they hadn't expected. It was Margaret Reed. Her voice was shaky as she stepped into the courtroom, her face pale, her hands trembling. But there was no denying the truth in her words. She spoke of the camps, of the children, of how she had tried to fight back, of how she had helped them, only to be silenced by fear. She had been a part of it, but she had never stopped trying to expose the truth. Her testimony was the final piece, the one that sealed Kessler's fate. When the verdict came down, it wasn't just Kessler who was convicted. It was a system that had allowed this to happen for far too long. The camps were shut down, the contractors were exposed, the children who had been taken, who had been forgotten, were finally given a chance to speak their truth. Lana stood in the back of the courtroom, her eyes closed for a moment. The weight of everything they had fought for, everything they had uncovered, washed over her. They had done it. It wasn't just about Kessler anymore. It was about all the Evelyns, all the Isabels, all the children whose names had never been heard. They would be heard now. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, Lana felt something she hadn't in years. Hope. A real, burning kind of hope. And with that hope came a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't done yet. There were more battles to fight, more truths to uncover. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone. The night was quiet when Lana stood outside, looking up at the stars. The weight of the case, the truth they had fought so hard to uncover, was still with her, but now it felt different. Lighter somehow, like the darkness had been chased away, if only for a moment. Beside her, Ghost sat, watching the world with the same steady gaze she always had. Lana ran a hand through the dog's fur, her mind still racing, but with the peace that came from knowing they had done the right thing. They had made a difference, and that difference would ripple out into the world, changing things, even if it was just one life at a time. And with that thought, Lana allowed herself a breath. Tomorrow would come. There would be more work to do, but tonight they could rest. The night air felt cooler now, as if the world itself had exhaled. Lana stood at the edge of the small park, her eyes tracing the outline of the distant mountains, bathed in moonlight. Ghost sat quietly beside her, her coat blending seamlessly into the darkness. The dog's eyes, ever watchful, flicked to Lana for a brief moment before returning to the shadows. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lana wasn't thinking about the case. She wasn't calculating, planning, or preparing for the next battle. Tonight, for just a few moments, she let herself exist in the stillness, surrounded by the quiet hum of the world settling into its natural rhythm. The tension, the constant pressure that had been her reality for so long, was finally beginning to ease. But there was no relief in this quiet, no sense of finality. The fight was over, yes, but it wasn't truly done. Not yet. Not while there were still children out there, still faces lost in the system. The case had closed, but the work had only begun. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. She reached for it, her fingers brushing across the cracked screen. It was a message from Rowan. "We got a lead on another camp, not far from here. Want to check it out?" Lana's pulse quickened, the familiar rush of adrenaline setting in almost immediately. She looked down at Ghost, who had already stood and was waiting, her tail slowly wagging in the dim light. Lana took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. The case was over. But this fight, the one that truly mattered, was far from finished. She typed back, "Let's go." The drive felt like it stretched on forever, the road cutting through thick trees that appeared like black shadows in the headlights. The world around them felt surreal, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wet earth. Lana's hands gripped the wheel, the familiar hum of the tires on asphalt, a soft soundtrack, to the thoughts racing through her mind. Rowan drove ahead, his truck cutting through the darkness like a beacon, a reminder of how much was still unknown. Jonah was beside him, leaning forward in his seat, eyes darting between the road and the map spread out on his lap. Every so often, he would glance over his shoulder at Lana's car, a silent acknowledgement that they were still in this together. The night seemed to stretch, each passing mile another reminder of the task that lay ahead. Ghost was quiet, as she always was when Lana's mind was occupied. The dog's presence, as steady and unwavering as the stars above, grounded her. Lana had grown used to the constant feeling of vigilance, to the way the world seemed to bend under the weight of 1,000 silent whispers. There was always something just beyond the horizon, something they hadn't yet uncovered. As they neared their destination, the road narrowed, winding deeper into the woods. The headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the faded signage that marked the edge of a long-abandoned logging camp. The place looked like something out of a nightmare. Rusted metal, dilapidated buildings, and an eerie quiet that seemed to stretch far beyond the physical boundaries of the camp. Rowan's truck rolled to a stop, the engine's rumble fading into the night. He gave a nod, the silent signal for Lana to follow. Her heartbeat quickened, but this was what she had trained for. This was the purpose she had found in this chaotic world. Together they approached the camp, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Ghost walked ahead, her posture alert, sniffing the air as they moved deeper into the decaying complex. The buildings here were in worse condition than the ones they had already uncovered. Windows broken, doors hanging loosely off their hinges. It felt abandoned, but there was something about it, something hidden in the decay, that made Lana's instincts flare. "This place has been empty for a while," Jonah whispered, his voice carrying the same weight that had settled on them all. Lana nodded, but didn't respond. She could feel it too. There was something here, something more than just dust and rot. The air felt thick, charged, and then a sound, a low whimper, cut through the silence, piercing the night. It wasn't just any sound. It was the sound of someone in pain. Lana motioned for them to move quietly, her hands signaling to Rowan and Jonah. They followed her, each of them moving with practiced caution, their steps slow but deliberate. The sound came again, closer this time. It was coming from the largest building in the center of the camp. Lana's heart skipped in her chest. "Please, not again." She pressed forward, her thoughts clouded with images of the children they had already saved, the ones who had been too scared to speak, the ones who had been buried in silence for too long. She couldn't let this place become another tomb. She nodded but didn't answer at first. Instead, she looked down at the ground, her boots sinking slightly into the dirt. She thought of Evelyn, of the way the girl's eyes had haunted her, how they'd burned into her soul. "We still don't know how deep this goes," she said after a long pause, her voice steady but full of resolve. "But I'll follow it to the end. For them." Days passed before they could dig deeper into the files. The investigation expanded rapidly. As they pieced together the scattered fragments of truth, they found more names, more locations, more children who had slipped through the cracks of a broken system. Lana's mind was filled with the faces of all the children, now not just Evelyn and Isabel, but the ones still missing. The ones no one had ever bothered to report, whose names were erased before they could be spoken. She knew she couldn't save them all. Not alone. But with the weight of this truth in her hands, Lana was determined to bring every last one of them home. The case was no longer just about catching Kessler or taking down one camp. It was about tearing down a system built on silence, on fear, on the suffering of those too young to fight for themselves. And with every step she took, with every new revelation, Lana knew that she had already started a fire, one that wouldn't be easily put out. As the sun set that evening, the first light of justice began to flicker in the distance. As she reached for Alice, pulling her gently into her arms, Lana knew that this was far from over. The fight for justice wasn't a simple battle. It was a war, and this was only the beginning. The drive back felt heavier. The road stretched on, an endless ribbon of darkness, and Lana found herself fighting the weariness in her bones. But as she glanced over at Alice, now safe in the back seat, something inside her stirred. Alice was alive. Alice was real, and she had a future. That was all the proof Lana needed. The rest, the endless fight for truth, would have to wait for another day. For now it was enough. The morning light came quietly, casting a pale glow over the world as it began to wake. Lana sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor, her mind tangled in 1,000 different directions. The case, Alice, the children still unaccounted for. It all felt like it was pressing in on her from every angle. She had thought, maybe naively, that once Kessler was behind bars, things would start to feel different, that the weight she carried would lift. But it hadn't. Not really, the battle had shifted, that was all. Ghost padded quietly into the room, her nails clicking softly against the wooden floor. She paused for a moment, her head tilted slightly, eyes meeting Lana's as if to say, "You've been staring at that same spot for an hour." Lana offered a faint smile, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. The familiarity of the gesture, the quiet comfort, was a small anchor in the sea of chaos. She stood, running a hand through her tangled hair. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was Rowan. The message short but sharp. "Meet me at the station. We need to talk." Lana felt a knot tighten in her stomach. It was never good when they wanted to talk. It was always about something that needed to be done, something that required her attention in ways she wasn't prepared for. But there was no time to waste. She had learned that much. The drive to the station was silent, the weight of the unspoken hanging between her and Ghost in the car. Lana's hands gripped the wheel, her mind on the task at hand. The world outside the car window blurred past, a wash of muted colors, each passing mile adding to the pressure. She had become accustomed to the constant tension that seemed to follow them, to the feeling that something important was just beyond reach. When she arrived, Rowan and Jonah were already there, standing outside the station, their faces taut with the same unspoken urgency. Rowan met her gaze as she stepped out of the car, his expression tight. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We've got another lead. This one's bigger." Lana's pulse quickened. "Bigger how?" Jonah stepped forward, holding a folder in his hands. He opened it, revealing a series of photographs and documents. "These came in this morning. Another camp, just like the one we found. But this one's in a remote location. No roads, no obvious way to get in unless you know exactly where you're going." Lana took the papers from him, her mind racing. The photographs were grainy but telling. Buildings in various stages of disrepair, fenced-in areas, and what looked like abandoned trucks and equipment strewn across the site. But what caught her eye was the location, the coordinates. It was close, too close for comfort. "We don't have much time," Rowan said, his voice low, almost urgent. "There's a local sheriff's office, but they don't have the manpower to dig into this. We're on our own for now. The clock's ticking. Lana nodded, already calculating their next move. Ghost stood quietly by her side, sensing the shift in atmosphere, her posture alert. She turned to Rowan and Jonah, her resolve hardening. Let's go. The journey to the remote camp was even more treacherous than the last. The road, if it could even be called that, was barely more than a dirt trail through the woods. Their vehicles bumped and jostled over the uneven ground, the tires kicking up dust in their wake. The air was thick with tension as they made their way deeper into the forest, the trees thickening around them like a wall. The weight of silence hung heavily in the air. Lana's thoughts were a blur. She couldn't shake the image of Alice's terrified eyes. Every child they found, every name they uncovered, it all felt like a thread being pulled on a never-ending, unraveling tapestry. She had once thought that finding the children was the goal, the end. But now she knew. It wasn't the end at all. It was only the beginning. When they arrived, the scene before them was almost identical to the previous camp. Rundown buildings, chain-link fences, and an eerie quiet that suggested they weren't alone, even if no one was visible. Ghost's low growl rumbled from beside Lana, and she held up a hand to signal for them to stay quiet. They were close. Rowan, Jonah, and Lana exchanged quick looks. They knew the risks. They had to be careful. If they were going to save more children, they had to be patient. But patience wasn't something Lana had in abundance anymore. The three of them moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the dense undergrowth, the sound of their breath mixing with the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. Ghost led the way, her nose to the ground, her ears perked, every muscle in her body tense. Lana followed closely, her eyes scanning the surroundings, alert to every sound, every movement. They reached the first building without incident. It was a barn of sorts, long abandoned and overgrown with ivy. The door was ajar, just enough for them to slip through. As they entered, the air inside was thick with the smell of mildew and rot. A faint light flickered from a small window at the far end of the room. And then, a sound, faint but unmistakable, echoed through the silence. A cry. Lana's heart stopped for a beat. She motioned for the others to follow, and, with a final glance at Ghost, who stood perfectly still, they made their way toward the sound. The closer they got, the clearer the cry became. This time, a desperate, choking sob. They were near. At the end of the barn, they found the source. A girl, no older than 12, crouched in the corner, her face bruised, her hands bound. Her eyes were wide with fear, but when they locked onto Lana's, there was something else there. A flicker of recognition, of understanding. She didn't speak, didn't move. She just stared. Lana crouched down, her voice soft but firm. "We're here to help you. You're safe now." The girl's eyes never left her, but the sobs started to slow, her body trembling as if realizing, perhaps for the first time in a long while, that she could trust, that someone had come for her. Rowan was already at her side, carefully cutting through the ropes that bound the girl's wrists. Jonah, his face a mixture of relief and exhaustion, stood watch. And Ghost, always alert, sat quietly, her tail slightly wagging in approval. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the girl's breathing, steadying as the ropes fell away. Lana's voice, barely above a whisper, broke the silence. "What's your name?" The girl's voice cracked as she spoke, her words fragile but real. "Ellie." And with that name, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Another child saved, another injustice confronted. But as Lana helped Ellie to her feet, the weight of it all pressed down on her. They had saved another life, but there were so many more out there. And the fight, her fight, was far from over. In the quiet aftermath of their discovery, Lana knew one thing. This wasn't just about solving a case anymore. It was about redemption, about healing, about giving these children the future they had been robbed of. And she would stop at nothing to ensure they had it. The drive back was quieter than before. Ellie was asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the window, her body curled into a ball like she was trying to protect herself from the world. Lana's eyes lingered on the girl in the rearview mirror. She had made it, just like Alice. But there were still so many more out there, so many that they hadn't found. Lana's heart raced, her thoughts already on the next step, The next lead. She wasn't done yet. There was still work to do, and she would see it through. For Ellie, for Alice, for every child lost to the system that had failed them. She wasn't finished. Not yet. The morning after their rescue of Ellie, Lana woke up with a sharp, gnawing sense of urgency in her chest. The sun had barely risen, casting a faint golden light through the curtains, but it felt too early to breathe easy. She pulled herself out of bed, Ghost already at her feet, her sharp eyes watching Lana with a quiet understanding. As the kettle began to hum on the stove, Lana's mind was far away, running through everything they had uncovered. Ellie's rescue felt like a victory, but the weight of the thousands of other children still trapped in the system hung over her like a storm cloud. The world outside may have been waking up, but Lana was already miles ahead in her thoughts, following the thread of their investigation, hoping it would lead them to the next piece of the puzzle. She reached for her phone, the screen lighting up with notifications. Messages from Rowan, from Jonah, from the local sheriff's office, and an email marked urgent, from someone she didn't recognize. It was a subject line that froze her heart. Urgent lead, uncovering new camp location. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, her eyes scanning the message quickly. There were no details, just a name. Vince Kessler, the man they had put away, the one who had orchestrated the system of camps, the one whose empire they had thought had crumbled. But this email, this lead, suggested there was more. Lana's stomach tightened. How much more? She shot a quick message to Rowan and Jonah, urging them to meet at the station. Ghost stood by her side as Lana grabbed her jacket, the dog's quiet presence a steadying force. There was no time for hesitation now. The drive to the station was a blur. The morning light was still soft, casting everything in a muted glow. But inside Lana, the pressure had already started building again. As she pulled up to the station, she saw Rowan and Jonah waiting outside, their faces grim. "We got something," Rowan said before she could even step out of the car. He handed her a folder, his eyes dark. "It's from one of Kessler's former associates. It's not just another camp. This is something worse." Lana took the folder, her pulse quickening. She opened it, her eyes scanning the document quickly. The words were simple, stark. Kessler's network is still active. There's a new facility, hidden beneath an old abandoned hospital outside the city limits. No one knows about it, not yet. But you can find it. She let out a shaky breath. How did they find this? Why now? Rowan ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. It came from a source deep inside the network. They've been waiting for the right moment. Kessler's associates are still working from the shadows. They know we're coming. Jonah's voice was quieter than usual. It's a trap. They know we're on their trail. We can't trust anything without confirmation. Lana's eyes flicked between them. But we can't wait. We've been too close to backing down, to thinking this was over. If we don't go now, we might lose our shot. Rowan nodded, his expression firming. I'll get the team. We'll move in fast. Lana paused for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. She had seen too many innocent lives destroyed by people like Kessler, too many children trapped in a broken system. She had been forced to learn, again and again, that justice was rarely as clean as it seemed in the beginning. It wasn't a battle she could ever win with just one victory. "Let's move," she said, her voice cold with resolve. The abandoned hospital was a decaying ruin on the edge of town, shrouded in mist. The air here felt different, heavier, more suffocating. Ghost, walking beside Lana, was unusually tense, her ears flat against her head, eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. It was the quiet that unnerved them, the stillness that suggested someone was watching. The windows of the hospital were shattered, the outer walls cracked and crumbling from years of neglect. Lana could feel the weight of the place pressing down on her as she moved forward, her boots crunching over broken glass and debris. They approached carefully, Rowan and Jonah flanking her as they made their way through the overgrown parking lot. The derelict vehicles, long forgotten and rusted. Every sense in Lana's body was on high alert, her mind running through every possible scenario, every angle. The stakes had never been higher. The entrance to the hospital was wide open, as though inviting them in. Lana's gut twisted. It was too easy. It was always too easy. She signaled for Rowan and Jonah to take the flanks, and Ghost stayed close to her, moving silently. The door creaked as they pushed it open, revealing the darkness within. The smell of stale air, mildew and decay hit them like a wall. "Stay sharp," Rowan murmured. Lana nodded, her heart pounding. They reached a set of stairs, the metal groaning under their weight. Lana's eyes flicked toward the upper floors. That's where it had to be. That's where the real danger lay. The door at the top of the stairs was slightly ajar. Without hesitation, Lana pushed it open. The room beyond was large, dark, and filled with shadows that seemed to flicker and move with the light from their flashlights. But it wasn't the shadows that caught her attention. It was the unmistakable sound. The faint, almost imperceptible sound of breathing, a low, raspy cough. And then the unmistakable click of something, a door maybe, something locking. Lana's instincts flared, her body moving on its own as she rushed forward. Ghost was right behind her, a low growl vibrating through her chest. Rowan and Jonah followed, and the closer they got, the more tense the air became. The breathing grew louder, frantic, like a muffled cry. They rounded the corner, and there, standing in the middle of the room, was a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in black tactical gear. His face was obscured by a mask, but there was no mistaking the way he held himself. His eyes, hidden behind the mask, flicked toward them with a cold, calculating gleam. He didn't move, didn't speak. Lana's hand instinctively went to her sidearm, but before she could draw it, the figure spoke, his voice muffled but recognizable. "You've come too late." The words hung in the air, chilling Lana to her core. She didn't need to ask who he was. She already knew. This was no longer just about finding the children. This was a confrontation, a fight for their lives, for everything they had worked for. And it was only just beginning. The air in the room grew thick with tension, every breath feeling heavier than the last. Lana's heart hammered in her chest as she stood face to face with the figure, the one who had been pulling the strings from the shadows. Her mind raced, calculating the possibilities, running through every detail of what they had uncovered about Kessler's network, about the children, about the twisted empire of fear they had dismantled piece by piece. But now, standing in front of this man, this enforcer, she realized it was never going to be enough. Kessler was the head, the mastermind, but the system was far deeper than she could have imagined. It wasn't just a network, it was an army, one that operated in the dark corners of society, hidden by the weight of corruption and fear. The figure didn't move, just stood there, his presence looming like a shadow over everything they had fought for. His eyes, cold, calculating, never left hers. "You think you've won," he said, his voice deep and controlled, muffled by the mask, but still unmistakably menacing. "But there's no end to this. There will always be more." Lana's jaw tightened. She didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. "We've won every battle so far, and we'll win this one too." The figure tilted his head as if amused. "You think you're different? You think you're any more special than the others? You're just a pawn in a game that's already been decided." A cold shiver ran down Lana's spine, but her voice remained steady. "I'm not playing your game. We're here to end it." The man's eyes flashed. Without warning, he pulled something from behind him, an old weathered envelope, the edges worn as though it had been carried for a long time. He held it out to her, a silent challenge in the motion. Lana didn't take it. She could feel the weight of the moment, the air thick with the knowledge that this was not just another skirmish. This was the endgame. He stepped forward, closer now, the masked, expressionless face looming over her like a phantom. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch, to twist, the darkness itself pressing against her. Ghost, standing beside Lana, growled softly, a low rumbling sound that made the man pause. "You really think you can save them all?" The man sneered, his voice laced with disdain. "You think you can undo what's been done? You're nothing but a stubborn woman and a dog. That's all you'll ever be." Lana's breath caught in her throat. The insult burned, but it was the realization of something even darker that made her move. This wasn't about saving children anymore. This was about survival, her survival, Ghost's survival. the survival of everyone who had come to fight for justice. And this man was standing between them and that. "No," Lana said, her voice low but filled with a fire that burned hotter than ever. "I'm not just a woman, and Ghost isn't just a dog. We are the ones who fight for those who have no voice. We are the ones who'll make sure they're heard." The man's lip curled in a thin, cruel smile. "Then die with them." It happened so fast. The sound of gunfire echoed through the room, sharp and deafening, as the figure lunged forward, his hand reaching for the weapon hidden at his side. But Lana was already moving, her body a blur of reflex, pushing Ghost out of the way just as a shot rang out. The bullet missed, but the fight didn't stop there. Lana dove to the side, rolling behind a crumbling metal shelf, her heart pounding in her chest. Ghost was beside her in an instant, growling, her fur bristling as she scanned the room for threats. Rowan and Jonah moved in the shadows, their movements calculated, but they knew this was it. This was the moment they had prepared for. The man's footsteps echoed, stalking the room, his gun raised. "You think you're the hero? You think you're the one who gets to win?" His voice was no longer calm, no longer measured. It was frenzied, desperate. "You don't even know what you're up against." Lana stayed low, her mind racing. This was no longer just about survival. It was about the truth, about the children, about everything that had been hidden from them. She couldn't let this man, couldn't let Kessler's empire, continue to haunt the world any longer. She reached for her own gun, fingers tight around the handle. "It's over." In a flash, she was on her feet, her gun aimed, and she fired. The man staggered back, his breath catching as the bullet struck him in the shoulder. His mask cracked, a jagged line splitting across the surface, revealing a glimpse of his face underneath. A face she didn't recognize, but one filled with raw hatred. He staggered, his eyes narrowing in fury, his hand tightening around his weapon. But before he could move, the door behind him burst open. Rowan, Jonah, and a team of local officers flooded the room. The fight was over. Lana took a breath, her body shaking with the adrenaline that had kept her moving through the chaos. She couldn't look away from the man, now on his knees, blood staining his uniform. He was panting, eyes wild with rage and disbelief. "You," his voice was a ragged whisper, "you'll never stop us. There's always more, always." Lana's gaze remained cold, unflinching. "Not anymore." She turned away, her heart still pounding, her mind racing. But in the end, it was over. The man, the network, were no longer a threat. The system had crumbled. Justice, though late, had finally found its way into the light. Ghost padded at her side, her steady presence a reminder of everything they had fought for, everything they had lost, and everything they had yet to win. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of everything that had happened. But it was a different silence now, one of finality, of resolution. Lana stepped outside into the cold morning air, the rising sun casting a soft glow over the horizon. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know how long the road to healing would be. But she knew one thing for sure: she had made a difference. And as she looked down at Ghost, whose gaze met hers with quiet understanding, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had won, and that for now was enough. If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like, share, and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want more powerful emotional stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. There's so much more to come.